right, in this video, we are doing an invoice audit. So we have Laura Croak here of LC Innovative Logistics. And how long have you been doing this for as far as reading like these invoices and seeing the weird stuff that's happening in them?
About 15 years.
Okay, so you've looked at hundreds, if not thousands of invoices.
Yep.
And you've kind of got the pattern recognition to see them right away, I assume. Like, like there's the 3, 4, 5 things that are always off. And you know immediately that this person's probably getting worked over by some company.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to throw up on the TV here a fake invoice, and you're going to walk us through it and just kind of some of the things that people should look for in this particular invoice. What are you noticing right away on it?
So on the terms, it says prepaid. So a lot of people think like, okay, I'm prepaying for my freight. What you don't realize is that a vendor is calling it prepaid and add. So what they're doing is you're prepaying for your product, but they're also adding in the freight charges. So always look for that. So that's the first thing. And then what I like to do is go to the actual vendor's website and try to pull up a catalog page or something on their website that shows me the product that company that I'm running the rate for, I can compare it to. Because most of the time on these freight invoices, the unit cost will be inflated because they...
So in this particular case, we're seeing unit cost of $32.99, $160. Sometimes you'll find that on the actual website and it'll be like a lower number kind of thing?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Do a lot of these companies post this publicly, those numbers then?
They should.
They should.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then usually if you go back and you ask them, like, why is this so much more? And they're going to say, well, it's 10% margin and that, blah, 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 blah. This is how, we figured it out because you're buying a quantity of 3, but we got you a discount. And then you're like, well, where's the discount? And then they'll immediately go down to the freight cost. So if you look at freight and then you see obviously pieces 1 and the unit cost of it is $679 and then your cost is 0. So they're saying, oh, well, you got free freight and you didn't. You're paying for it in the product cost. And then there always will be something on the invoice that you didn't purchase. So they'll say like, oh, the hardware kit comes with, just as an example, the hardware kit is what packages all of your product in there. And then it's like marked up. Ridiculous. So like you're spending, I may have made it a little higher on this one, but like it'll just be a higher amount. You'll be like, what is this? And they're going to say, oh, well, this comes with it because you're going to need this to use, X, Y, and Z product. So that's the other thing too. And then another option to look at when reviewing it too is the packaging. So the packaging should always be included with the freight cost. You should never be paying additional for them to wrap it. That's included in the freight.
So if you see that on an invoice right away, it's like a red flag immediately for you.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff you're talking about too, it kind of reminds me of like if I'm using DoorDash and you're just kind of going through and you're like, how many fees are there? And you're just like, well, there already was a delivery fee, but then there's a tip, and then there's your fee, and that's kind of like what you're looking for sometimes in these invoices, is just finding all these little hidden fees that are throughout the invoice.
Correct.
So I believe one of the things you do for your company is you actually do free invoice audits, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if somebody was interested, they can check that in the description. There'll be a link to your website where you can go through that, because it's probably something that you can spot it in 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
But it's because you've been doing it for 15 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then if you scroll down on it, so I did an example from Paterson, New Jersey to Buffalo, New York. The freight cost, from what they're saying, is $679. To me, on 1 or 2 pallets, that's extreme.
Yeah.
Like I just know that just from working in the industry for a really long time. Anybody who's shipping would be like, oh, what a great deal. It's under $1,000.
Yep.
That's really high freight cost. So majority of the time when you look at a vendor, they'll throw like a pallet dimension on there. So on here I have 48 by 40 by 56. About 90% of the time whenever I get the invoice versus what we actually shipped it as, the vendor's always wrong with their weights and the specifications of what they're shipping.
Yeah.
And that the dimensions and the weight and how many pallets you're shipping are how the freight companies will basically charge you for. So if you're paying $679 on 2 pallets that are a standard size pallet and normal weight, you are being overcharged.
Okay. Would you say, like, looking at the invoice though, like, because somebody that doesn't have your experience, what is the very first thing when you look at this that's the first red flag that like immediately somebody can look at their invoice and maybe be able to see?
Freight, zero cost.
Freight, zero cost.
Right.
Okay, so that's typically one, like
right.
more than half of the time you're already like, all right, something's up.
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other tips or advice as far as like reading an invoice audit or things of that nature when you're like looking at the invoice?
I mean, just the freight costs, I would ask, I would ask them to show you the invoice of the actual, like a similar shipment, or if you've done it with them in the past, just be like, oh, can I see your actual invoice from the carrier that shipped this for me? Okay. Just so you can kind of see, because they are marking it up. I mean, that's how they're making their profit. They're, that's always what they're going to do. And then sometimes they'll say terms collect on an invoice, and that usually means that the customer should be routing it and they're making a profit off of you as well. Okay. So I use the example of prepaid, where they prepaid and then add the freight to your invoice. Collect would mean that the customer is going to be sending in their own like logistics company basically, and that should also be a red flag.
Okay. Yeah, so if somebody has an invoice and they want to get that checked out, in the description of this video will be a link to Laura's company's website, and they can get a free invoice audit, right?
Yeah,
and that's not something you're not asking for a credit card or anything, just free invoice audit, no strings attached. So
correct.
Check out the description, and we'll catch you in the next video.